This is my true story. I trusted my friend for years, shared my life, laughed, and cried with him. I trusted my wife completely, believing our love was strong and safe. But one day, everything fell apart. My friend betrayed me, and my wife stood beside him. My world broke in ways I could not imagine. I felt hurt, lost, and powerless. But I chose not to stay silent. I found the proof of their betrayal and decided to expose them where it would matter most. Before I share, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. He grew up with this friend, side by side through every stage of life. They shared childhood games, secrets whispered in the dark, and dreams that felt too big for anyone else to understand. School was easier because they had each other, and even the hardest teachers could not break their bond. When life became work and responsibility, he still stood by his friend. He celebrated his successes, helped carry his failures, and trusted him with every part of his life. When he met his wife, he introduced her proudly to his friend, believing that she would see the same loyalty he did. Every meal, every conversation, every laugh between them felt like proof that the friendship was unshakable. He shared family moments, birthdays, and holidays, believing that his friend was as much a part of the family as anyone else. He never doubted the bond they had, never imagined that it could be broken. In his heart, he thought love and friendship were enough to withstand anything. He trusted fully, with every fiber of his being, believing that betrayal was a word that existed only in stories, not in his life. Every morning, he thought about the years of shared memories and assumed they would protect him from the pain that would come. He gave his friendship freely, without expectation, believing that loyalty and trust were always returned in kind. Even when his wife laughed a little too brightly in his friend's presence, he dismissed it. Even when she lingered in conversations, he told himself it was harmless. He believed in the strength of his bond, convinced that those who knew him best would never betray him. Every handshake, every pat on the back, every quiet nod across a room reassured him. In his mind, his world was solid, built on trust, shared history, and mutual respect. He never imagined that the people he loved most could conspire against him, that the foundations of his life could crumble silently behind his back. This loyalty shaped him, guided his decisions, and gave him a sense of security he never questioned. He believed that his faith in people was not naive, that love and friendship were the strongest shields against pain. And yet, the very people he trusted most were plotting betrayal, waiting for the moment to shatter everything he had built with love, care, and unwavering belief in their honor. He began noticing small things at first, moments so subtle that he almost convinced himself they meant nothing. His wife's smiles grew brighter, lingering longer than they used to, especially whenever his old friend came around. Those smiles felt different, warmer, softer, almost secretive, and they unsettled him without him fully understanding why. She laughed at jokes that didn't seem funny, and the way she looked at him changed ever so slightly, with an intensity he had never seen before. Visits from his friend became more frequent, often when he was not home, and excuses that had once seemed ordinary, helping with errands, fixing something around the house, suddenly felt rehearsed, repeated too often to be purely innocent. Each time he noticed a small detail, he pushed it away, telling himself that he was imagining things, that trust should come before suspicion, that he loved them both, and that love should blind him from doubts. But the unease inside him grew quietly, like a small ember smoldering beneath the ashes. He told himself that friendship and loyalty were stronger than fleeting attractions, and that he would see things clearly only if he watched patiently. Still, the signs kept piling up. He noticed the way their eyes met when they thought no one was watching, the way his friend's hand lingered a little too long on hers, the private jokes whispered that left him on the outside. He tried to dismiss it as imagination, as paranoia fueled by tiredness and overthinking. But deep inside, a knot was forming in his chest that would not loosen. Every smile, every laugh, every small touch seemed to mock him silently, and the more he ignored it, the more it built a quiet, growing storm inside his mind. He remembered all the years he had stood by his friend, shared secrets, endured hardships, trusted him like a brother, and introduced him to his wife without hesitation, proud of the bond he had created. And now, that same bond began to feel fragile, ready to snap under the weight of things unspoken, gestures misunderstood, and glances too long. He continued to observe them, patient but increasingly unsettled, forcing himself to see nothing, to assume nothing, all while noticing everything. He realized that what he once considered harmless familiarity now carried hidden meaning. He saw the laughter that seemed too warm, the time spent alone together that seemed too convenient, the way they both seemed to share a language he did not know. His trust told him to ignore it, but his instincts whispered differently. Still, he refused to act too soon. He clung to his hope that this was nothing, that the people he loved would not betray him, that perhaps he misread innocent gestures as something sinister. But the ember burned on, small but undeniable, and each day he saw them together, it flared a little higher. And yet, he waited, quietly, patiently, believing in love, in friendship, in loyalty, all the while knowing in the back of his mind that his patience was leading him closer to a truth he feared but needed to face. One evening, he came home earlier than usual, intending only to finish a small task, but what he found stopped him cold. The house was quiet, too quiet, and an uneasy feeling crawled up his spine. He picked up his wife's phone, almost without thinking, and immediately saw it. Messages he never imagined could exist, messages that cut through him like a sharp blade. They were private, secret, and intimate. Conversations between his wife and his old friend, the very man he had trusted like a brother. The words were affectionate, flirtatious, mocking in ways he could barely process. She wrote things he could not believe someone he loved could say, laughing at him behind his back, sharing thoughts and jokes that excluded him entirely. The messages revealed late-night calls, plans made in secret, and moments that were never meant for him to see. Each text felt like another betrayal, another layer of pain pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He scrolled through pictures they had exchanged, snapshots that proved intimacy, closeness, and deception. Every photo, every word, every laugh frozen in a digital message was a hammer blow, and yet he could not look away. He realized, with sinking certainty, that the woman he loved and the friend he had trusted for decades had conspired against him in silence. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the faces he saw daily, the wife he kissed, the friend he laughed with the truth before him. How could someone he opened his heart to, someone he shared his life with, mock him so cruelly? How could a friend who had stood beside him through every hardship turn into a traitor in the most intimate way? His heart ached, not just from the loss of love, but from the destruction of trust, the foundation upon which his life had been built. He saw patterns now he had ignored before, the lingering glances, the shared jokes, the convenience of absence whenever they wanted privacy. It all made sense now, painfully clear, and yet the clarity brought no comfort. The more he saw, the more the room seemed to close in, the walls pressing down, echoing with their laughter in secret. He had always believed in loyalty, in love, in honesty, but those beliefs felt fragile now, shattered by evidence he could not unsee. The man he thought of as a brother, the woman he had vowed to love, both stood guilty in the same frame, captured in messages and calls he had stumbled upon by chance. A mix of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief swirled inside him, threatening to consume him, but he forced himself to breathe, to steady his hands, to understand what must be done. This was not a moment for rage. This was a moment to collect, to plan, to turn pain into purpose. He reread the messages carefully, cataloging the moments, seeing patterns that confirmed betrayal rather than coincidence. Each line, each word, each intimate plan between them became part of a story he could not ignore, a story that demanded exposure. And as the reality sank in, he felt a strange calm settle over him, a determination that would guide his next steps. He knew then that shouting, confronting, or begging would not serve justice. Proof would serve justice. Evidence would speak louder than any word he could say. The betrayal was real, undeniable, and in his hands. And in that realization, he found a sense of power in what had once felt like total helplessness. a quiet, grim understanding that what had been stolen from him could now be turned into the instrument of truth. When I first realized the depth of their betrayal, it felt as if the ground beneath me had vanished. My old friend, the one I trusted with my secrets, and my wife, the woman I had devoted my heart to, had both conspired behind my back. I could not speak to anyone about it. The shame, the disbelief, the raw pain, it was mine alone to carry. Each night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house, imagining their laughter and whispered words echoing through the walls, words meant for each other but felt like knives piercing my chest. I remembered the countless times I had stood by them, defended them, celebrated their victories, and yet here I was, completely blindsided by their deceit. I understood something crucial in those dark hours. Confrontation would serve them more than me. If I yelled, if I demanded explanations, they would twist my words, paint me as the jealous fool, and the world would believe them, as it always seemed to. Their skill was in deception, in making others doubt the victim, and I refused to give them that power. The anger that rose in me at first threatened to consume me, but I realized that silence, though painful, could be more dangerous than noise. As the nights stretched into weeks, I began to look at the messages, the photos, the recordings differently. At first, they were like fresh wounds that refused to scab over, reminders of humiliation and betrayal. But slowly, as I revisited them with clearer eyes, I began to see a strategy forming within the chaos. These wounds, these tokens of their secret life, were not just sources of pain, they were evidence, proof that could not be denied. Each message where they laughed at my trust, each photo shared in secrecy, each recording of conversations behind my back became a brick in a wall I could build around the truth. I cataloged them meticulously, not out of obsession, but because I understood that careful preparation was necessary. If I acted impulsively, I risked losing control and letting them escape accountability. Pain had transformed into purpose. Grief had transformed into determination. And I realized that my suffering could finally serve a purpose beyond its own torment. In those silent hours of preparation, I thought endlessly about who should see this truth first. The answer came naturally, even painfully. His children. They were the most innocent, the most undeserving of the lies their father had spun. They needed to see the man they admired exposed for the hypocrisy he carried within. I knew that when they understood, it would leave a mark deeper than any punishment I could devise, because nothing wounds a man more than losing respect in the eyes of his own children. I visualized the moment repeatedly, walking them through my mind as if rehearsing a play. How they would look, how their faces would shift from joy to confusion to disbelief, and finally to recognition of the betrayal in front of them. Every detail mattered in this silent plot, and in planning it, I found a strange peace. Gathering the evidence became an act of ritual. I printed the messages, labeled them carefully, recorded the calls multiple times to ensure clarity, and assembled photos into folders that left no doubt. Each piece was proof, undeniable and irrefutable, but also a reminder of the pain they had caused me. My hands shook the first few times I handled them, but I forced myself to steady them. I could not allow fear or sorrow to control me. This was no longer about vengeance and anger. It was about justice and clarity. I organized everything into a single envelope, sealed with precision, nothing added, nothing removed. The envelope became a symbol of the control I had regained, a tangible representation of the power I held through preparation and patience. Every careful step I took in assembling it strengthened me, turning despair into strategy, bitterness into focus. By the time I had finished, I felt transformed. I was no longer just the man they had wronged. I was the man who held the key to revealing the truth. I was no longer helpless in the face of betrayal. I had replaced my rage with calm, my sorrow with resolve, and my heartbreak with planning. The envelope was not just paper. It was the culmination of weeks of careful thought, sleepless nights, and emotional discipline. I understood that when the moment came, all the weight of my suffering would be translated into undeniable exposure. And for the first time since I had discovered the betrayal, I felt something like control returning to my life. I had decided that I would not let their actions break me further. I would let their own choices be their undoing, and I would do it with dignity, without screaming, without shaming myself with anger. The envelope contained only the truth, and the truth I knew would speak louder than any words I could force from my lips. When the initial shock of betrayal began to settle, I realized that impulsive action would only serve them, not me. I understood that if I confronted my old friend and my wife with shouting, with accusations, with anger spilling from my lips, they would twist everything I said. They would make me appear weak, jealous, or irrational. Their skill had always been in deflection, in making themselves the victims, while others absorbed the blame. I thought about every time I had stood by my friend, every time I had trusted him with my secrets, and I realized that confrontation in words would do nothing. They had survived by manipulating perception, by turning truth on its head, and I refused to give them that power. I needed another way, a method that could not be distorted, a method that would speak louder than any argument. That was when it became clear. I would fight not with noise, but with proof. I started to see the tools of their betrayal differently, the messages, the photos, the secret recordings. Once they had been like flames scorching my heart, reminders of pain and humiliation. But in this quiet reflection, I realized that they were not just reminders of my suffering. They were instruments of justice. Each late-night message where they mocked me, each photograph where they celebrated their lies in private, each recorded call where their voices laughed at my trust, all of it could be used to reveal the truth in a way that they could not deny. My heartbreak transformed into strategy. My sorrow transformed into careful planning. I understood that patience was my ally and preparation was my weapon. Every detail I had observed, every shred of evidence I had collected in my sleepless nights, became a brick in the wall I would build around the truth, a wall so solid that they could not escape it. As I considered who needed to see this truth first, my thoughts turned to the people who mattered most, those who could not be shielded from reality, who deserved to know before anyone else. I thought of his children, innocent witnesses to a man they idolized, completely unaware of the duplicity that had shaped their lives around lies. I realized that exposing the betrayal to them would strike at the heart of his pride in a way that no other form of revenge could. They trusted their father implicitly, revered him, and this trust, once shattered, would mark him forever. The thought of that weighed heavily on me, but I also understood its justice. He had betrayed not only me, but the very family he had promised to care for. And in my quiet, methodical way, I decided that they would be the first to witness the truth, unfiltered and undeniable. The planning became almost ritualistic. I gathered the messages, printed them neatly, each one carefully selected to show the depth of their deception. I organized the photos into chronological order, every picture representing a secret act of betrayal, every image a silent witness to their treachery. The recordings were labeled, saved, and tested for clarity, ensuring that no doubt could remain. Handling these pieces of proof was not easy. Each time I looked at them, I felt the sting of what they had done to me, the echo of the laughter and mockery I had been forced to endure in secret. But I forced myself to see beyond the pain. I forced myself to recognize that this was no longer just my suffering. It was a tool, a weapon, a means to restore balance and take back the control that had been stolen from me. As I worked, my anger began to calm, replaced by a sense of clarity I had not felt since the betrayal was first revealed. Every document I filed, every recording I listened to again, every photograph I placed carefully into the collection strengthened my resolve. I was building something deliberate, something permanent, something that could not be erased by lies or excuses. I had transformed my weakness into strength, my despair into purpose, and my heartbreak into meticulous preparation. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided. I was the man who held the key to revealing the truth in the most precise and effective way possible. Finally, after days of preparation, I sealed everything into an envelope. I did not add commentary, no explanation, no accusations, no flourishes. The proof spoke for itself. It was heavy in my hands, not just in weight, but in significance. I knew that when it reached the right person, it would not need me to shout, to plead, or to justify. The envelope contained the culmination of my pain, my insight, and my strategy. It was a silent weapon, one that would strike at the heart of the betrayal without me ever having to raise my voice. In that moment, I felt a strange peace. I had accepted the depth of the hurt, but I had also transformed it into a tool that could finally balance the scales. And so I promised myself that I would not allow bitterness or rage to consume me. I would not act recklessly, nor let the fire of anger blind me. Instead, I would let the truth, carefully prepared and undeniable, do the work for me. The enemy in this story, my wife and my former friend, would be exposed not by my shouting, but by the silent weight of undeniable evidence. And in that silent act of preparation, I found the first real sense of power since discovering their betrayal. I had turned heartbreak into purpose and betrayal into a weapon that could no longer be ignored or denied. The day finally arrived when the opportunity to reveal the truth presented itself. It was not a random moment, not a sudden chance, but a carefully chosen occasion where the impact would be undeniable and where the betrayer could not hide behind excuses or lies. My old friend had invited me to a family gathering, a dinner meant to celebrate togetherness, laughter, and trust. The house was filled with warmth, the smell of food, the soft hum of conversations, and the innocent chatter of children. Every element of this gathering made it perfect. It was the perfect stage for the truth because it was a moment where pride and appearances were at their highest. The very atmosphere that he had built to display his success, his family, and his so-called morality would be the very environment in which his lies would crumble. As I walked into the house, I observed everything carefully. My old friend, the man I had grown up with, who had shared my secrets and my dreams, smiled as he greeted me warmly. There was no suspicion in his eyes, no trace of doubt, no hint that the life he had meticulously curated was about to shatter. Beside him, his children ran and laughed, their bright eyes full of admiration and trust. The room was alive with innocence, a stark contrast to the darkness of his deception. And there she was, my wife, sitting in a place of comfort, a place she had earned over the years, unaware that the foundation of her life, the people she trusted, had been tainted by lies and betrayal. I took a deep breath and felt the weight of the envelope in my pocket. It was heavy, yes, but it was also filled with purpose, the purpose that had carried me through sleepless nights, heartbreak, and silent fury. I watched them as they moved about the room, speaking to friends, arranging plates, laughing at jokes. Every movement, every smile, every gesture reminded me of the countless hours I had spent trusting them, believing in their loyalty. And now, every one of those moments had been twisted into a mask they wore to hide their betrayal. The innocence of the children made the deception even more palpable, more damaging, more urgent. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness for what had been lost, for the innocence that had been tainted, for the trust that had been stolen. Determination because now, at this precise moment, I held the means to restore some measure of balance, to let the truth walk boldly into the room and dismantle the carefully constructed illusion. I moved slowly, deliberately, blending into the gathering as if nothing had changed, as if I was just another guest. Every step I took was measured, every smile I offered to others carefully neutral. I did not want suspicion. I did not want hesitation. My timing had to be perfect. The envelope in my pocket was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of justice, of retribution, of revelation. I reminded myself over and over that this was not about vengeance in the heat of anger. This was about setting the record straight, about exposing truth in the most undeniable way possible. The children needed to see reality before illusions could take hold, and the adults needed to see the full measure of what they had hidden. I chose my moment carefully. I waited until the room was alive with conversation, until every guest was settled, until the comfort of the setting lulled everyone into a sense of security. This was crucial. If I acted too soon, it would be dismissed. If I acted too late, some might doubt the evidence or rationalize it away. Timing was part of the strategy, as important as the proof itself. As I looked around, I saw my old friend laughing with his children, smiling proudly, believing his mask was secure. I saw my wife chatting with the other guests, her attention divided, but her face composed, unaware that the fabric of her carefully maintained deception was about to unravel completely. I felt the adrenaline rise, but I kept my movements calm and controlled. I reminded myself that I had done the hard work already, collected every message, every photograph, every recording. The laborious hours of compiling proof, reliving pain, and transforming anger into purpose had all been preparation for this very moment. Now, all that remained was execution. The envelope in my pocket was no longer just an object. It was the culmination of every sleepless night, every pang of heartbreak, every moment of silent fury. It was the embodiment of truth, and it was about to walk quietly but forcefully into the center of the room. As I positioned myself near the center of the gathering, I observed the reactions around me. The laughter, the chatter, the blissful ignorance of the children. And I knew that what I was about to do would be unforgettable. This would not be a private confrontation, easily denied or hidden. This would be a revelation so undeniable that the children, the family, and every observer present would see the truth in its entirety. I tightened my grip on the envelope and felt a moment of clarity wash over me. I had become the instrument of justice, the calm hand that would allow the truth to be delivered exactly where it mattered most. No shouting, no confrontation, no anger, just proof, silence, and the inevitability of truth. In that instant, the decision was final. I would stand, I would reveal, and they would have no way to hide. Their deception, which had been sustained for months in secret, would be exposed in full view of those who mattered most. I took one last breath, feeling the weight of every moment that had led me here, and prepared to act. The stage was set, the audience ready, and the instrument of justice was in my hand. All that remained was for the truth to speak. I stood slowly, deliberately, letting the chatter fade around me. The children's laughter paused, the adults' smiles faltered, and every eye in the room turned toward me without me saying a single word. I could feel the tension shift, like a wave moving through the room, pulling all attention into a single, undeniable focus. My hand went into my pocket, feeling the weight of the envelope that held months of betrayal, pain, and preparation. It was heavier than any burden I had carried in my life, but it was a burden I had transformed into purpose. I exhaled quietly, and with steady movements, I pulled the envelope out and held it before me. Every heart in the room seemed to beat faster as eyes darted from me to my old friend, then to my wife, and finally to the children, who sensed that something was about to happen that would change everything they believed. I opened the envelope with care, knowing that the smallest mistake could lessen the impact. Inside were the messages, each one carefully printed, each photograph neatly preserved, each call log clearly documented. These were the moments that had cut me deepest, the conversations where laughter and mockery had replaced honesty, the moments that revealed deception in its purest form. As I started to read aloud, the room grew quieter. Every word, every sentence, every mocking remark was carried through the air with clarity and precision. The adults froze as recognition dawned, their faces draining of color. My old friend, the man I had trusted like a brother, had no words, no excuses. His pride, carefully built over years, crumbled in a single moment of undeniable truth. The children looked on, their expressions changing from curiosity to shock, then confusion. They had admired this man, seen him as a figure of authority, strength, and moral guidance. But now, through the evidence I presented, the walls of illusion were falling. They could see, in black and white, the betrayal that had been hidden behind smiles and laughter. Their father, who had taught them right from wrong, had been violating that very trust, secretly mocking others and deceiving the people he claimed to love. Their innocence was shattered in an instant, and I felt the weight of that impact, knowing that the truth was painful but necessary. I moved carefully through the room, pointing to each piece of evidence without anger, without accusation, only letting the truth speak for itself. Every detail I shared added weight to the revelation. Every mocking message, every hidden call, Every secret photograph became a hammer striking the foundation of their deception. My wife's face went pale as the realization hit her. She had thought she could protect herself, shield herself from consequences, but the exposure was complete and total. My old friend's eyes darted helplessly from me to the children, then to the envelope that had destroyed the life he had pretended to lead. The room was silent, except for my calm voice, reading each line carefully, ensuring that nothing was left to interpretation. The power of this moment was not in shouting or confrontation, it was in undeniable proof, presented with precision and patience. The children, once so full of admiration, now looked with a mixture of confusion, disappointment, and shame. They could not unsee the truth. They had been witnesses to the collapse of the man they had idolized, and in that moment I realized that the weight of exposure was more devastating than any personal vengeance could have been. The adults around us gasped, whispered to each other, and stared in disbelief. Friends and relatives who had been enjoying the evening now realized the full scope of deception. My old friend's carefully curated life, the mask he wore every day, had been stripped away in an instant. Every lie, every secret betrayal, every hidden action was now visible to those who mattered most. There was no defense, no justification, no words that could repair the damage. The truth had done its work with precision, leaving nothing for him to manipulate or deny. As I finished revealing the last piece of evidence, I paused and looked around the room. I saw the pain, the shock, and the confusion, but also the clarity that only truth can bring. My old friend slumped in his chair, defeated, his children staring with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. My wife trembled, realizing that the shield she had relied on for protection was gone. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret plan had been laid bare, and nothing could undo what had been revealed. In that moment, I felt neither anger nor triumph. I felt the weight of justice being served. The silence that followed was deafening, but it carried the message I had worked so long to deliver. Betrayal had consequences, and the truth, when presented with care and certainty, could dismantle even the strongest facades. I stepped back quietly, letting the evidence, the words, and the undeniable truth fill the room. I did not need to shout. I did not need to accuse. The impact of the revelations, seen and felt by everyone present, was far stronger than anything I could have said in anger. I had transformed my pain into a tool, my heartbreak into a method, and the moment of exposure was perfect in every way. The room, once full of laughter and life, had been altered forever, the scales of justice quietly balanced by the evidence I had presented. The room stayed heavy with silence for several moments, as if the air itself had been thickened by the weight of truth. Every person present seemed frozen, their expressions caught between disbelief, anger, and confusion. My old friend, once full of arrogance and charm, now sat slumped, defeated, with nowhere to hide. The proud mask he had worn for years had shattered in front of those who mattered most, his children staring with wide eyes, struggling to reconcile the father they thought they knew with the man who had betrayed not only me, but also the trust of his own family. I could see the disbelief etched across their faces, the slow dawning of realization that the person they had idolized and relied upon had been living a lie, laughing at others in secret and valuing deception over loyalty. His wife, too, had been swept into the torrent of revelation. She trembled, clutching her hands, unable to respond at first. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the evidence I had carefully delivered. She had believed in her marriage, trusted the man she had shared her life with, but the messages, the calls, and the photographs told a different story, one of mockery, betrayal, and unfaithfulness. The shock was written on her face, the betrayal undeniable. She glanced toward her children, seeing them looking at their father with confusion and hurt, and realized that the consequences of deception stretched far beyond what she had ever imagined. Every action my old friend had taken to hide the truth had failed spectacularly. Around us, the other adults in the room whispered quietly to one another, their murmurs like a tide of judgment rising and crashing over him. Colleagues, neighbors, and family members who had once held him in high regard now looked at him differently, their respect evaporating in an instant. They saw a man who had betrayed the people closest to him, and the collective shame and disappointment in the room was palpable. Friends shifted uneasily in their seats, some unable to meet his eyes, while others shook their heads in disbelief at the depth of his deception. The power dynamics that had once protected him were gone. The web of lies he had spun had been cut thread by thread, leaving only the naked truth behind. I watched as the children's initial shock turned to questioning glances toward their father. They were young, but they were old enough to understand betrayal in its purest form. They had grown up seeing him as a figure of guidance, strength, and moral authority, yet now the foundation of their trust was crumbling. Every whispered insult, every hidden message, every mocking joke he had shared at my expense was now illuminated for them to see. They could no longer idolize him blindly. Instead, they were forced to confront the reality that the person they had loved and trusted most had been deeply flawed, deceitful, and cruel. The impact of this revelation was more powerful than any words of mine could have been. The weight of the truth was teaching them, in one swift lesson, that character mattered above all else. The adults around the table began to confront my old friend in soft murmurs, their voices carrying a mixture of anger and sorrow. No one shouted, no one needed to. The proof was already there, undeniable, unarguable. Every whisper and comment, every piece of evidence, spoke louder than any accusation I could have made. He tried to find excuses, tried to explain, but the explanations were futile. Each attempt to rationalize or soften the blow fell flat against the wall of truth I had built so carefully. In this room, the scales had shifted completely, and he could no longer command authority or sympathy. Every eye was on him, every glance a silent verdict of disappointment and betrayal. My own heart, though still heavy from the betrayal I had suffered, felt lighter as I watched the consequences unfold. This was not revenge born of anger or rage. It was justice delivered through careful preparation, patience, and truth. I did not need to shout. I did not need to threaten. I let the evidence speak for itself, and it carried the impact far beyond anything I could have imagined. I realized that true exposure does not require force. It requires clarity, timing, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. Watching his life unravel in front of those who mattered most was both painful and satisfying, a confirmation that the betrayal he had committed would no longer go unnoticed or unpunished. As the room slowly settled into stunned murmurs, I took a step back, letting the weight of the moment sink in for everyone present. The children continued to look at him with confusion and sorrow, and the adults now understood the full scope of the deceit. His reputation, once carefully cultivated over decades, had collapsed under the weight of undeniable proof. I did not celebrate their downfall. I simply allowed the truth to fulfill its purpose. I walked away quietly, leaving them to face the consequences of their own actions. In that silence, I understood that the exposure of betrayal could be far more devastating than anger, far more permanent than confrontation. The aftermath was complete. The lesson undeniable, and the power of truth had been made clear to everyone in the room. I did not rush. I did not storm out in anger. I simply stood for a moment longer, letting the weight of what had just unfolded settle over the room. Every glance, every whisper, every questioning stare had done the work I could never have done with shouting or confrontation. I watched my old friend sink further into shame, his shoulders slumping, his face pale and defeated. His children, once filled with admiration, now stared with confusion and disappointment, their trust fractured in an instant. I knew that no words of mine could heal their hearts, and no excuses from him could erase the truth I had revealed. The adults around us were still murmuring softly, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. They had seen the betrayal, felt the deception, and understood the depth of his lies. The room no longer held celebration or laughter. It held judgment and reflection. I walked slowly toward the door, my footsteps measured and calm, carrying neither anger nor malice, only the quiet satisfaction of justice. I felt no need to gloat. My revenge had not been about humiliation for the sake of pride. It had been about exposing truth, about ensuring that those who were deceived could see the reality for themselves. Every step I took felt lighter than the last. The burden I had carried for weeks, the betrayal by both my wife and my friend, was finally being released. I had not screamed. I had not yelled. I had not begged for apologies. I had wielded patience, evidence, and timing as my instruments, and they had worked perfectly. The room behind me was filled with stunned faces, with the aftermath of truth made visible, and I knew I had done everything I could to restore balance without losing my own dignity. My old friend's power over me, over the lives around him, had crumbled in a single, quiet act of exposure. As I reached the doorway, I paused to take one last look. The children, innocent yet now aware, were trying to reconcile their love for a father with the betrayal he had committed. The adults were processing the enormity of the deception and the courage it took to reveal it. I felt a quiet pride, not in causing pain, but in bringing clarity, in ensuring that truth prevailed. I understood that revenge is not about loudness or chaos. It is about precision, patience, and the courage to act when the time is right. I had done all that, and now the consequences were theirs to bear. I stepped outside, feeling the cool air brush against my face. It was as if the world itself had exhaled with me, releasing the tension that had been building inside me for so long. I had walked away from betrayal, from heartbreak, and from dishonor, carrying only the knowledge that I had acted rightly, that I had defended my integrity, and that I had exposed the truth to those who needed to see it most. The weight of betrayal, though heavy, had been transformed into a force for justice, a lesson that would linger long after I had gone. I knew they would live with the consequences every day, every glance from his children, every whispered comment among adults, every subtle judgment would remind them of the choices they had made. They had mocked trust, they had betrayed love, and now the world around them, starting with their own family, was aware. I had not needed to raise my voice. I had not needed to threaten or plead. I had simply presented the truth in its rawest form, and the fallout had done what no words could achieve. Their shame was complete, their respect gone, and their future permanently altered by their own actions. Walking away, I felt the release of all the pain, all the sleepless nights, all the anguish that had threatened to consume me. My steps were steady, my heart lighter, and my mind clear. The exposure had been deliberate, careful, and absolute. I had ensured that justice was served without compromising my own character. I had turned betrayal into a lesson, heartbreak into purpose, and evidence into action. I understood finally that true revenge does not need anger to burn. It needs only patience, strategy, and undeniable proof. And so I walked into the fading light of the afternoon, leaving behind a room forever changed. My old friend would never look at his children the same way again. His wife would never trust him again. And those who had witnessed the revelation would remember the courage it took to act rightly. I carried nothing but dignity and quiet triumph. I had not sought to destroy, only to reveal. I had not acted for pride, only for truth. And in that quiet, measured exit, I felt the first real peace I had known since discovering the betrayal. The lesson I carried with me was clear. Betrayal may wound, but exposure heals. Silence, patience, and truth are more powerful than anger, louder than shouting, and more permanent than revenge born of impulse. I had acted as an old man with wisdom, not as a young man blinded by rage. The power of truth had been made evident, and I had delivered it with calm precision. Walking away, I understood that the most lasting punishment is the knowledge of guilt and shame that must be carried every day by those who betrayed. Now, as I sit in the quiet of my old age, I can look back on that time with a sense of calm I never had in the days immediately following the betrayal. The pain was sharp then, cutting through every moment, every thought, and every memory. I thought I would never be able to breathe freely again. I replayed their laughter, their whispered words, their casual betrayals, and it felt like a constant storm inside me. But with distance, I see the value in what I did, and I understand the lessons that betrayal forced me to learn. I learned that those we trust most, those we call family and friends, are sometimes the very people who can wound us the deepest. I learned that love, however genuine, can be exploited when combined with deceit. I learned that anger, if not directed wisely, can consume the one who feels it more than the one who caused it. And I learned that silence, patience, and carefully applied truth are stronger than any shouting, any revenge fueled by rage. I think often about my old friend, about the way he looked when the truth was finally revealed, and about the way his children saw him. I do not feel joy in his humiliation. I feel only satisfaction that justice, however quietly delivered, was achieved. His betrayal could have destroyed me, could have left me bitter and angry for the rest of my days. But by choosing strategy over impulse, patience over confrontation, I reclaimed control of my life. I let the evidence speak, and in letting it speak, I freed myself from the grip of their deceit. I watched them crumble without my direct attack, without my screaming, without my anger. I let the consequences of their own actions fall upon them naturally, and that proved to be more effective than any fight I could have staged. Over the years, I have shared this story with a few close listeners, hoping they will understand the power of calm and deliberate action. I tell them that betrayal, as painful as it is, can be turned into a tool for justice if approached wisely. I emphasize that revenge is not about destroying the other person out of hatred, but about revealing truth in a way that cannot be denied or twisted. I remind them that our dignity is our most important possession, and it cannot be sacrificed for momentary satisfaction. By holding my silence, by collecting the evidence, and by exposing the truth to those who deserve to see it, I maintained my own dignity while ensuring that those who betrayed me could never hide behind lies again. I also reflect on my wife, on the woman I had trusted, and on the lessons her betrayal taught me. I do not dwell on anger or regret. I accept that she was part of my story, that she made her choices, and that her actions, while painful, revealed the true character of those around me. I learned to value honesty above all else, to recognize the signs of deceit, and to trust my instincts more than blind loyalty. I learned that betrayal is not just about losing someone you love. It is about gaining clarity, about understanding who people really are, and about reclaiming power that was unjustly taken from you. Looking back, I also see the power of timing and preparation. The moment of exposure in front of his children was deliberate. I knew it had to be witnessed by those who would feel the greatest impact, those whose trust and admiration he had exploited. I did not act out of malice, but out of understanding that the full weight of truth needed to land where it mattered most. Children are the mirrors of our actions. They see honesty and dishonesty clearly, even when adults try to disguise it. By choosing that moment, I ensured that the lesson was witnessed fully, that the consequences were permanent, and that their actions could not be swept under the rug. Finally, I have come to understand that the most enduring victories are quiet victories. They are not celebrated in loud applause or public displays of anger. They are victories in which truth is revealed, dignity is preserved, and justice is served without sacrificing one's own character. I have carried this lesson with me for decades, sharing it with those who will listen, hoping that they too can learn the strength that comes from patience, preparation, and courage. I have healed, not because betrayal did not hurt, but because I chose to respond wisely, calmly, and effectively. And so, I leave this story with one final thought. Those who betray will face the consequences of their own choices. Those who are silent, patient, and deliberate in seeking justice will find that truth has power far beyond their anger. I lost trust, yes, but I gained clarity. I lost friends, yes, but I preserved my dignity. I was heartbroken, yes, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and free. And in that freedom, I finally understood that revenge is not about rage. It is about justice, truth, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that those who mocked, betrayed, and deceived will carry the weight of their own actions, while I carry the knowledge that I acted with honor. Final thought. They betrayed me in secret. I revealed them to the world with patience, proof, and dignity, and I walked away free, unbroken, and at peace.